There are two kinds of mornings at the brownstone. The kind where Nero Wolfe doesn't speak until Fritz rings the lunch bell, and the kind where someone bangs on the door with a crisis that can't wait. Tuesday started out as the first kind, quiet, structured, and blissfully predictable, until the bell rang at 9:37 a.m., which in our house is the equivalent of a 4-alarm fire. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was weighing the risk-to-reward ratio of asking Fritz for one more when the doorbell went off. Wolfe didn't even glance up from his orchid spray bottle. I set my cup down with a sigh and went to get it, hoping it was the mailman and not another woman who'd lost a poodle or a fiancé to suspicious circumstances. I opened the door to find a tall man in a 3-piece charcoal gray suit that looked like it cost more than my last 3 suits combined. He had the kind of posture that said private school, boardroom, and lawyers on speed dial. He didn't wait for an invite. "I'm Arthur Barish. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent." I gave him my best polite but I don't care face. "He's busy. Try me." "It's about my sister," he said, brushing past me like I was a coat rack, "and a lie that nearly ruined her." I shut the door behind him and followed, figuring Wolfe wouldn't appreciate a stranger in the office, even if the man had shoes you could see your reflection in. Wolfe was still misting orchids, acting like there wasn't a 6-foot banker breathing his filtered air. "Mr. Wolfe," I said, "this is Arthur Barish. He's just inserted himself into the office. Says it's urgent. Something about his sister and a lie." Wolfe sighed through his nose. "Confound it, Archie. Why does every family crisis in Manhattan require my attention?" "Maybe because your name's not in the phone book under sympathy," I said. Wolfe didn't crack a smile. He finally turned, gave Barish a once-over, and waved him toward the red chair across from his desk. Wolfe sat, leaned back, and folded his hands across the equator of his middle. "Well," he said. Arthur cleared his throat. "It concerns my sister Emily. She's a chef, a well-known one. Runs a boutique catering firm. Last month she catered a private dinner for a venture capitalist named Theo Brenton. 3 days later, a photo appeared in the New York Ledger of what they claimed was an icebox in her prep kitchen, full of rotten ingredients. Spoiled meat, unclean containers. It was sensational. Within 24 hours, half her clients pulled out." Wolfe's eyes remained half-lidded. "And you wish me to restore her reputation?" "Not just that," Barish said, leaning forward. "The photo was staged. The health inspector found nothing during the surprise follow-up. But someone planted that food. Someone set her up. And Theo Brenton, he hasn't said a word. He's vanished." I admit, that got my attention. Theo Brenton wasn't just rich. He was headline rich. Tech world, IPO rich. Disappearing wasn't something men like that did without a noise. I said, "And you think he's the one who tanked your sister's business?" Barish looked at me. "I think someone in his circle did. She got too close to something. There were documents. She mentioned a file she saw by accident in his office. Something about offshore payments and fake vendors. A week later, she's smeared and he's gone." Wolfe reached for a glass of beer Fritz had set earlier, took a sip, and set it down like he regretted wasting good malt on this morning. "And your sister?" "Still shaken. She's closed her business for now. Won't talk to anyone." Wolfe glanced at me, and I could already feel him winding up the old refusal pitch. But then he said something that made me straighten up. "I will consider it," Wolfe said. "Leave your contact information with Mr. Goodwin." Barish blinked. "You'll take the case." I said I would consider it. "Archie will take down the essentials. I'll make my determination shortly." I showed Barish to the door, scribbled his number in my notebook, and watched him get into a black town car that looked like it hadn't seen a meter in years. I came back and found Wolfe in his chair, still staring at nothing. "You're not even pretending to refuse this one," I said. "Why the sudden interest?" Wolfe didn't answer right away. He sipped his beer again. Then he said, "The detail that offends me, Archie, is not the disappearance of Mr. Brenton or the allegations. It is the icebox. I blinked. The icebox. Yes, someone tampered with a private kitchen for the purpose of slander, to manipulate perception using food as evidence. That violates something elemental. It is vulgar. It is cruel. And that's enough for you to get involved. Wolfe nodded once. And it happened under the guise of honesty. He closed his eyes. There is no greater lie than one hidden in a supposed truth. I whistled low. All right, so where do we start? He didn't open his eyes. With the chef. So that afternoon, I found myself heading downtown to a shuttered kitchen that had once catered to the kind of elite who could name-drop wine estates like cousins. I had one name, one address, and a hunch that if Wolfe had decided to get off the mental couch this fast, we were in for something more than just spoiled ham. And if someone had really planted lies in that icebox, well, I was about to find out how cold this trail could get. When I got back from my downtown excursion, the first thing I noticed was that the brownstone didn't smell like anything. No garlic, no thyme, no savory miracles wafting from Fritz's kitchen. That meant one of two things. Either Fritz was out, which was impossible unless the world had ended, or something had interrupted his rhythm. I stepped in and heard Wolfe's voice, low, clipped, and unmistakably irritated, coming from the office. I found Wolfe at his desk, arms crossed like a Roman statue with indigestion, facing a woman who didn't seem the least bit fazed by his disapproval. She had a look that said publicist or crisis manager, long navy trench, sharp bob, smarter than you eyes, and she was standing in the middle of the room like she owned the air between the walls. This, Wolfe said, gesturing toward her like she was an offensive sculpture, is Ms. Claudia Keene. She has appointed herself as an intermediary. Claudia gave me a cool glance. Arthur Barish asked me to clarify details regarding his sister. Mr. Wolfe doesn't seem to believe in clarity. I stepped around her, took my seat and said, he believes in it. He just prefers it without intrusion. Wolfe grunted. She insists on providing additional context. It is unwanted. Claudia's voice didn't rise an inch. Emily didn't tell Arthur everything. She's protecting more than her name. She's protecting someone who doesn't want to be found. That got a blink out of Wolfe, which in his language is the equivalent of a double take. He leaned back and eyed her. Who? He asked. She won't say, but I think she came across something, documents, names that put her in danger. I don't believe the spoiled food was just to ruin her business. I think it was a warning. Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the armrest. That was his version of pacing. I asked, you her lawyer? Number I manage reputations. Mine, hers, and people who pay me to keep the wrong stories out of the news. Wolfe closed his eyes for a second. And what is your concern in this matter? Claudia pulled out a file from her oversized bag and placed it on Wolfe's desk with a clean thud. Two of Emily's former clients. One is a hedge fund manager. The other owns a media platform. Both cancelled events the week after the photo leaked. Both had connections to Theo Brenton, and both quietly paid out settlements over the last 2 years to parties we can't identify. I picked up the file, skimmed the front page. Legal redactions, timelines, a few internal memos with clipped subject lines like inventory discrepancy and Q4 variance alert. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to look like they weren't hiding anything while hiding something. Claudia said, I'm telling you this because Arthur can't, and because Emily won't. Wolfe let out a long breath through his nose. Do you enjoy insinuation, Ms. Keene? I enjoy prevention. If something happens to Emily, people will claim she was unstable, that she torpedoed her career. But you know what unstable people don't do? They don't redact settlement memos. I'll give her this. She was good. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, and didn't flounder in front of Wolfe's full-glare disapproval, which meant she either had nerves of steel or a backup plan in her shoe. "Very well," Wolfe said. "Leave the file. Mr. Goodwin will speak to your Emily. I will determine whether the facts justify further action." Claudia's smile was too small to be polite and too sharp to be friendly. "I'll wait to be proven right." She left in a trail of perfume that tried to be discreet and failed. Wolfe didn't say anything for a good 30 seconds after the door closed. Then he said, "Pooh." I grinned. "She got under your skin." "She is presumptuous and manipulative. I despise being steered. But you're not tossing the file." "Number, because if what she suggests is true, then we are not investigating sabotage. We are probing something systemic." He didn't say corruption, but it hung in the air like stale smoke. Wolfe hated corruption, not in the moral sense, but because it was untidy. It interfered with the machinery of logic, the clean click of cause and effect. I flipped through the rest of the file. "You think Emily's lying?" "Number, I think she is omitting, which in matters of consequence amounts to the same. And Claudia, she is not a liar. She is something worse. She believes in discretion." I chuckled. "That makes two of you." Wolfe lifted a brow. "I have never concealed a truth. I have only withheld it until it could be proven." That afternoon, I called Emily Barish. She didn't want to talk, but I've never been shy about using charm as a crowbar. After some gentle persuasion, mostly involving a promise not to publish a word without her say-so, I got her to agree to meet me the next day at her shuttered prep kitchen in Brooklyn. Meanwhile, Fritz finally emerged with a face like someone had moved the salt without permission. Apparently, someone had come into the kitchen while he was tending the sauce and rearranged the spice cabinet. I do not misplace time, Archie. Someone touched it. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at me. And just like that, the brownstone had been disturbed. It wasn't much. A jar, a triviality. But when Nero Wolfe notices something out of place in his house, you don't treat it like a coincidence. You treat it like a prelude. And if someone had the gall to meddle with his pantry, they either didn't know him or they knew him far too well. You can learn a lot about people by how they react to a closed door. Some knock and wait, some knock and open, some don't knock at all, assuming they're expected. Emily Barish didn't knock. She unlocked the steel shutter of her Brooklyn kitchen like she was defusing a bomb, carefully, silently, and with eyes that had stopped trusting the dark. She was 35, give or take, with a face that used to smile easily but had recently forgotten how. She wore a long chef's coat over jeans, no makeup, no earrings. The kind of woman who didn't need flair because she used knives for a living and didn't need anyone to forget it. I agreed to meet, she said as we stepped inside, not to confess. I gave her a calm nod. Fine by me. I'm not the law. I'm the guy who pokes holes in stories until the truth leaks out. She locked the door behind us. The kitchen was sterile, clean enough to eat off the floor, and yet it had that faint emptiness you get in places that used to be busy but weren't anymore. Like a restaurant waiting for its own obituary. You said in your call this wasn't just about food, she said. I took out my notebook and clicked my pen. Let's say I believe someone framed you. What I don't get is why. You serve croquettes, not subpoenas. She hesitated. Then she said, Theo Brenton was trying to impress a potential investor, a man named Everett Klain. The dinner was at Theo's penthouse. Intimate. High stakes. I was prepping in his private kitchen when he got a call and left his laptop open. I didn't go looking, I swear, but something popped up. A spreadsheet. It had entries that didn't add up, vendors that don't exist, payments labeled as consultation but made offshore. I whistled low. And you told him? Number Y took a screenshot, just in case. You still have it? She shook her head. 3 days later, my phone was stolen. I wrote that down. So you're saying someone found out you saw something and they wanted to ruin you? I think Theo told someone, or someone was watching. After the article, my clients dropped me. No one asked questions. They just fled. I looked around. And you haven't tried to fight it? You ever fight the internet, Mr. Goodwin? I didn't answer. She had a point. The court of public opinion doesn't offer appeals. I asked her for the guest list from that night. She gave me 6 names. I left the kitchen with more questions than answers, and a page full of people who probably all had something to hide. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat reading the Gazette like it was scripture. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Guest list?" he asked. I handed it over. 6 names, 1 frozen kitchen. No happy endings. He scanned the list. Everett Klein, Chief Executive Officer of New North Investments, recently acquired 3 biotech startups. Big wallet, I said. Bigger silence. He pointed to another name. Nico Hart, food critic, often overly dramatic. Once described a salmon mousse as existentially disappointing. That's talent. Wolfe read the rest aloud. Evan Lott, personal attorney for Brenton. Lenora Vale, private event planner. Marvin Krantz, ex-journalist turned PR consultant. Harrison Dell, assistant to Brenton, currently unreachable. Wolfe set the list down. Interview them, all of them. Do not infer, Archie. Extract, so I did. 1 by 1 over the next 2 days. Everett Klein met me in a hotel lounge that reeked of money and leather. He looked bored the entire time. Said Theo Brenton was erratic but gifted. Claimed he hadn't heard from him since the night of the dinner. When I brought up Emily, he barely blinked. I eat to close deals, not to remember the menu. Nico Hart, the critic, was easier to read. Loved the drama. Claimed he left the dinner early due to a distressing odor in the truffle risotto. Also mentioned seeing Marvin Krantz near the fridge when no one was looking. Marvin Krantz, for his part, looked like he hadn't slept since the Bush administration. Said he'd come to observe the optics. Denied touching anything in the kitchen. Got twitchy when I asked about Klein's reputation. Lenora Vale didn't like questions. She met me in her office and kept glancing at her phone like it owed her money. She insisted the event went smoothly, but admitted Brenton had tension with someone at the dinner. When I pressed, she offered a name, Evan Lott. Evan Lott met me at his firm. Slick, precise, and made of Teflon. Claimed attorney-client privilege 6 times in 10 minutes. Said Theo was restructuring operations, which I guess is code for ghosting the planet. Harrison Dell, Theo's assistant, was still off the radar. No calls returned. No trace. When I laid it all out for Wolfe, he didn't speak for a full minute. He finally said, "This is not a case of a single culprit. It is a convergence of concealments." I gave him a look. "You want to unpack that?" They each guard their own secrets. Some professional, some personal. But one of them knew Emily had seen something. One of them fabricated the photo, and someone rearranged our spice cabinet. That last bit brought it all back. "Still think that's connected?" I asked. Yes, it was deliberate. Designed to send a message. About what? Boundaries. He rang for Fritz. When the door opened, Fritz entered holding a small jar. "I found this under the pantry drawer," he said. "It's not mine." He handed it to Wolfe. A spice jar. The label read, "Cumin, Costa Rica." But it was sealed with a different tape than Fritz used, and on the bottom, a faint smear of red wax. Wolfe turned it in his hand. "This did not come from this house." I said, "You think someone planted it?" Wolfe looked at me. "Yes, and that person has stood in this room." So now we had 6 suspects, 1 vanished financier, a ruined chef, and someone who had crossed Wolfe's threshold and left behind a trace. And when someone leaves behind something in Wolfe's kitchen, they might as well leave a confession. If there's one thing Nero Wolfe can't stand, it's the idea that someone might come into his house and treat it like a hotel lobby. The brownstone isn't just where he lives. It's a temple. You don't leave fingerprints on the glass. You don't mislabel the spices, and you sure as hell don't leave behind foreign condiment jars like you're dropping breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Which is how I found myself playing errand boy for justice, with Wolfe's blessing and a suspicious Costa Rican cumin jar in my jacket pocket. I started with the guy most likely to handle physical items, Marvin Krantz. A former investigative journalist turned PR consultant, Marvin had a habit of standing near refrigerators at awkward times, according to Nico, the drama critic. He worked out of a cluttered office on the Upper West Side that smelled like old toner and betrayal. He recognized me as I stepped in. "You're Wolfe's guy. Goodwin, I know your type." "That's comforting," I said. "Then you know I don't waste time." I handed him a photo of the spice jar I'd taken with my phone. "Ever seen this before?" He leaned in. His eyes twitched just enough to betray the lie he was about to tell. "Nope." "Funny," I said. "It turned up under a drawer in Wolfe's pantry after a few visitors, and one of them happened to be you." "I didn't—" He stopped himself. "I was never in the kitchen. You weren't. But Claudia Keene was, and so was Lenora. I don't need to know who planted it. I just need to know who brought it in." Marvin wiped his forehead with a napkin. Okay. Look, I didn't know what it was. Claudia handed it to me and said to give it to Wolfe. Said it would trigger a recognition. That's all. I didn't even know it was spice." I frowned. "She gave you a jar of cumin and told you to smuggle it into Wolfe's house. She said Wolfe would understand, that it would connect things." Now that was interesting. Claudia wasn't just managing reputations. She was playing chess with spice jars. I left Marvin sweating in his recycled air and went to my next stop. Claudia Keene, the architect of subtle chaos. She met me at a rooftop cafe near Bryant Park like she hadn't slipped anything into Wolfe's house. She ordered espresso and smiled like she'd rehearsed it. "I see Marvin cracked," she said. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." I put my hands on the table. "You planted a foreign spice jar in Wolfe's pantry. That's not a clue. It's an invasion." She leaned in. "That jar belonged to Theo Brenton. Emily gave it to me after dinner. It wasn't part of her kitchen stock. She said it looked out of place." "So you thought it would be clever to reintroduce it into a setting Wolfe controls?" "I thought Wolfe would see it and recognize something I couldn't explain." "And did he?" "Oh, I think he did." I stared at her. Claudia wasn't bluffing. She'd given Wolfe a detail to chew on. Whether he found it tasty was still up for debate. Next on my route was Lenora Vale, who operated her event planning empire out of a whitewashed midtown suite that looked like it had never hosted an event messier than a paper cut. She was cold and clipped and made me wait 10 minutes, even though I could see her through the glass wall doing absolutely nothing. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, sitting like a judge at a sentencing. "Back again." "Ms. Vale," I said, "how do you feel about cumin?" She blinked, not in surprise, just confusion. "Excuse me?" "Cumin. A particular jar from Costa Rica. Ring any bells?" "Of course not." "Someone brought it to Theo Brenton's dinner. It didn't belong in Emily's stock, but it belonged to someone who was there. Possibly someone who knew they'd be watched." Lenora's face didn't move. "I don't know anything about that." "Everett Klain, Evan Lott, Nico Hart, Marvin Krantz, Harrison Dell. All were there. If someone used the kitchen to plant something, it had to be someone who had access. Then ask them. I'm asking you." She narrowed her eyes. "Do you think I poisoned something?" "No," I said. "I think you helped host a dinner where someone tried to burn a reputation, and you kept quiet." Lenora stood up. "This interview is over." I didn't push it. She was the kind who talks later, when she thinks she has something to gain. The only one left on my list was Evan Lott, the lawyer. I caught up with him outside a private club downtown, where the doormen wore gloves in May and everyone drank bourbon before noon. "Mr. Lott," I said, catching him before he slipped inside. He gave me the lawyer's smile, warm, hollow, and airtight. "Back again? You ever buy gourmet spices from Costa Rica?" He paused, just long enough. "Number why?" "One turned up in a kitchen that got someone fired. I think you know why." He frowned. "I'm an attorney, Mr. Goodwin. I don't cook, and I certainly don't commit food sabotage." "Did Theo Brenton?" That landed. Just a flicker, a momentary lapse in composure. Then it was gone. "I wouldn't know," he said. "Theo had unique habits. Like laundering money through catering vendors?" He gave me a hard look. "Watch yourself." I smiled. "I always do." He disappeared behind the club doors. But I'd seen what I needed. Theo Brenton had people covering for him, which meant he was either guilty, scared, or dead. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out for Wolfe. He listened in silence, only interrupting once, to ask how Claudia had phrased her comment about recognition. When I told him, he nodded. "The jar," he said. "It is a brand used by a vendor linked to one of Klane's shell companies. I recall it from a shipment list tied to a lawsuit 3 years ago. Theo Brenton likely used it to funnel funds." "So Claudia knew?" I asked. Number, she suspected. She gambled. "And she won?" "Partially," Wolfe said. "Now we know the lie held in the icebox wasn't just culinary. It was financial." I was about to ask what next when Saul Panzer called. Wolfe picked up himself, which he only does when things turn from interesting to vital. After a brief conversation, Wolfe hung up and turned to me. "Harrison Dell has surfaced. He attempted to book a flight out of LaGuardia under an alias. And? He failed. He is currently in holding. Saul is bringing him here." "To the brownstone?" "Yes." I stood. "That makes all 6 in play." Wolfe nodded. "And soon, Archie, they will all be seated. Together." Which meant one thing. Wolfe was preparing to hold court, and when that happens, someone always walks out stunned. If you've never seen Harrison Dell, imagine a man who's spent his adult life trying to disappear into corners. Medium height, forgettable haircut, and the kind of voice that never quite settles into a register you remember. When Saul Panzer brought him through the front door of the brownstone that evening, the guy looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days and had eaten nothing but nerves. Wolfe didn't get up, of course. He stayed behind his desk, arms folded, the cumin jar sitting right there like a witness on the stand. Saul sat Harrison in the red chair and gave Wolfe a quick nod before disappearing into the hall. I took my usual seat beside the desk and opened my notebook. Wolfe didn't speak right away. He let Harrison marinate in the silence. It took 39 seconds. I counted. "Mr. Dell," Wolfe said finally. "You attempted to flee New York this morning using an alias. A poor one, if I may say so. Harry Stokes is not the name of a man who vanishes. It is the name of a man who is found." Harrison's eyes darted between us. I wasn't running." "No," Wolfe lifted a brow. "What were you doing then? Touring LaGuardia's security architecture?" Harrison swallowed. "I panicked." Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Then let us work backward. You panicked. Why? Because Theo Brenton is missing. Because a catering business was sabotaged. Because a jar of imported cumin was found in a kitchen where it did not belong." At that, Harrison's posture shrank. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. "I didn't plant the food," he said. "I swear, I didn't ruin Emily Barish." "But you know who did." I think I do. But if I say it..." He didn't finish the sentence. I said, "Then you'll be next?" He nodded. Wolfe let out a sigh, and when he spoke again, his voice was cool, deliberate. "You are already next, Mr. Dell. The moment you fled, you ceased to be neutral. Someone will notice. Someone will ask questions. You cannot remain in hiding forever. You may speak here, or you may eventually speak to someone less inclined to protect you. I don't want to end up like Theo. That caught my attention. I leaned forward. What happened to him? I don't know for sure, Harrison said, voice shaking. But the night after that dinner, he told me he was going to clean things up. Said he had to make a drop. Something to do with a file. The next morning, he was gone. His phone disconnected. The office got a vague email about stepping away, for health reasons. But I know him. He wouldn't walk away without a plan. Wolfe drummed his fingers on the armrest. And this file? He kept it in the walk-in freezer at the penthouse. He said it was the safest place in the apartment, that no one would look there. The icebox, Wolfe muttered. A literal one. Harrison nodded. I was at the dinner. I saw Emily go into the kitchen when Theo left the room. She came out different. I think she saw the folder. Theo didn't say anything, but he started acting cagey. Then that article hit. The photo, it was too clean, too staged. The lighting, the angles, it wasn't a surprise shot. Someone composed it. Wolfe gave a curt nod. That will do. Saul reappeared and escorted Harrison to the guest room upstairs. Wolfe gestured to me to close the office door. When I did, he stood up, miracle of miracles, and walked over to the safe. I wish to show you something, he said. He pulled out a small envelope sealed in red wax, the same shade as the faint residue found on the bottom of the spice jar. He broke the seal, removed a slip of paper, and handed it to me. It was a purchase receipt. From 2 years ago, for a set of spices imported from Costa Rica, delivered to a midtown address under a corporate name, Crown Fork Consulting. The signature at the bottom was that of Everett Klain. Klain? I said. He ordered the spice? Yes. Crown Fork was one of several shell entities used in a laundering operation. Theo Brenton, as you suspected, used high-end events as fronts to siphon money. Emily stumbled on one of the ledgers, but the receipt proves Klain's involvement goes deeper. He wasn't just a partner. He supplied the ingredients, both culinary and financial. And Claudia knew this, I asked. She suspected. The jar was bait, and I bit. Fritz knocked and entered without waiting. That alone was a red flag. There's something wrong in the cellar, he said. The wine rack has been disturbed. Wolfe stiffened. What exactly? Fritz held up a bottle of Riesling. This was moved. The vintage is out of sequence, and one of the Bordeaux bottles is missing entirely. Good God, Wolfe muttered. Not again. I raised an eyebrow. You think the same person who planted the cumin jar came back? Number. That would be theatrical. This was targeted. Something else is missing. Not wine. Something stored alongside it. He went to the office bookshelf, pulled out a slim, leather-bound binder, and flipped it open. His finger traced down a list. Yes, a file. I'd stored a copy of the lawsuit against Crown Fork down there. Sealed. For reference. You think someone found it? Someone searched for it. Whether they found it remains to be seen. I walked over to the wine rack myself later that night. Wolfe had strict rules about that cellar. Humidity, light, order. It was a vault for things he didn't want. Disturbed. The missing file wasn't valuable in itself, but in the right hands, it could expose connections between Brenton's clients and Klain's empire. Someone had taken a risk to retrieve it. The next morning, Wolfe had Fritz cancel all deliveries and lock every entrance. We will be the ones holding the dinner now, Wolfe said. I gave him a look. You're hosting a dinner? Of sorts. Everyone who attended Theo Brenton's Last Supper will be invited here. They will sit in that room, under those lights, and I will speak. All 6 suspects in your office? Yes, and one of them will betray themselves. How? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. By speaking. That afternoon I made the calls. Claudia didn't hesitate. Lenora asked too many questions. Everett Klain pretended it was beneath him, then accepted. Nico Hart said he wouldn't miss it for the drama alone. Marvin Krantz asked if he could bring antacids. Evan Lott was silent for a long time before muttering, "Fine." And Harrison Dell, already upstairs, didn't get a vote. By sunset, the stage was set. 6 suspects, 1 missing file, a dinner that wasn't about food, and Wolfe seated like a monarch, ready to carve someone's lies into pieces. There's something about preparing for a showdown at the brownstone that changes the air. Fritz cooked, sure, but the food wasn't the point. He knew it, Wolfe knew it, and so did I. The meal was just the bait on the hook, a warm-up for what Wolfe had in mind. And tonight, we weren't entertaining guests. We were luring suspects into the lion's den, disguised as dinner. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Fritz, in his starched apron and precise frown, opened it. Claudia Keene was the first through the door, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral she was trying not to be blamed for. She gave me a nod, cool and unreadable. Next came Lenora Vale, punctual and displeased. Her heels clicked like accusations across the hallway tile. "I don't know what this is," she said, brushing past me. "But if I'm being dragged into theater, I expect it to end before my 9 o'clock call." "Stick around," I told her. "You might get a starring role." By 7:15, they were all there. Nico Hart made the most dramatic entrance, naturally, declaring the wallpaper too committed to beige. Marvin Krantz came in sweating like he'd run from the IRS. Evan Lott arrived last, face locked in that smug lawyer mask that only cracked when he had to pass Claudia in the hall. They didn't nod. That silence had a history. Inside the office, Wolfe sat at his desk, the big globe lamp glowing like an interrogation spotlight. Fritz had laid out hors d'oeuvres in the front room, but Wolfe wasn't wasting time with small bites or niceties. He'd summoned them for one reason: pressure. He waited until they'd all settled awkwardly in their chairs. Then he opened his eyes and said, "Thank you for coming. This is not a social call. This is a reckoning." That got the room's attention. Claudia leaned forward, hands crossed in her lap. "Then let's not pretend it's anything else." Wolfe gestured toward the center of his desk, where the cumin jar still sat like a loaded revolver. "Each of you was present at a dinner that preceded the destruction of a woman's career. One of you is responsible, possibly more than one. That woman, Emily Barish, was not merely a caterer. She was a witness, and witnesses are liabilities when money flows in the wrong direction." Evan Lott scoffed. "This sounds theatrical, even for you." Wolfe didn't blink. "Mr. Lott, you may regard the law as a flexible tool. I do not, and I will not abide manipulation of it in my house." I took that as my cue. I stepped forward with a stack of copies of the now-retrieved lawsuit Wolfe had sealed in the wine cellar. We'd found it early that morning, stuffed behind a misplaced bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape, its envelope slit open, but otherwise untouched. Someone had taken it, read it, and returned it. That told us 2 things. They wanted the contents, but feared being caught with it. And they were careful enough to clean up. Almost. I passed the copies around. No one spoke. They read. Wolfe continued, "You'll see in those pages the original complaint filed against Crown Fork Consulting. A laundering operation. You will note the signature. Everett Klain." Klain didn't move. His lips tightened. The file also includes references to vendor inventories, one brand in particular, a Costa Rican spice exporter used repeatedly to falsify bulk purchases. That same brand and jar turned up in my pantry, left there as a warning or as an echo. It tells me 2 things. First, someone here has a history they thought buried. Second, Someone brought their mess into my house. Marvin Krantz shifted. Nico Hart tilted his head like he was watching a play he couldn't quite follow. Claudia remained still, but her knuckles whitened. Wolfe pressed on. Theo Brenton vanished, not because he was frightened, but because he intended to silence the chaos before it bled into his accounts. He failed. And now, the filth leaks forward. That's when Saul entered. Without a word, he handed Wolfe a slim envelope. Wolfe opened it, pulled out a photograph, and passed it to me. Mr. Goodwin. I held it up to the group. It was a still image taken from a security feed, grainy but clear enough. It showed someone standing in Wolfe's wine cellar, bending over the Bordeaux shelf. The face wasn't visible, but the body language and clothing were. I passed it to Claudia. Her face went still. That's not me, she said softly. But I know who wore that coat. Lenora, all heads turned. Lenora Vale's jaw set, and she stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I haven't been anywhere near your cellar. Wolfe said, the coat you wore that evening had a distinctive lining, blue paisley. Fritz noticed it when he took your jacket. The same lining is visible in the reflection of a wine bottle on the shelf. I added, the same coat was seen entering the brownstone a second time, after the guests had left. Lenora's voice broke. I didn't steal anything, he told me the file would ruin everything. Who? Wolfe asked. Klain. He said if the lawsuit surfaced again, investors would pull out. He said it was just insurance, that no one would miss it. I didn't know it was yours. Klain finally spoke, calm and slow. You were sloppy. And you were lying, Lenora snapped. I did your dirty work. Wolfe tapped his fingers. Enough. The room fell silent. You, he said, looking at Lenora, entered my cellar uninvited. You removed a sealed file. You violated a boundary that exists not merely in space, but in principle. Lenora sat back down, stunned. Wolfe's voice softened dangerously. But you did not stage the photograph that destroyed Emily Barish. All eyes turned again. Wolfe looked at Nico. Mr. Hart, you mentioned the photo was composed. How would you know? Nico blinked. It was obvious. The lighting was too deliberate. Wolfe nodded. So you've staged photos before? A beat. Yes, Nico said, for reviews, to emphasize the ambience. Wolfe pointed to the cumin jar. You handled this at the dinner. I smelled it, Nico said slowly. It was on the counter. I thought it was odd. Why? You left fingerprints. So did Claudia. But the prints under the lid, those belong to one person. Marvin Krantz. Marvin's mouth opened, then closed. No, he said. You had the access, the motive. You were the one who handed the photo to the ledger. Claudia's voice was ice. You did this to Emily. I didn't want her hurt, Marvin said. I just needed a distraction. Klain promised me a position, said the Brenton coverage was getting too close. Said if I could plant something to shift attention, I'd be rewarded. And Brenton? I asked. Marvin hesitated. He knew. He approved it. Then he got scared. Wolfe's voice dropped to a final calm note. So you faked the rot. You arranged the shot. You burned a woman's life to shield your finances. No one spoke. Then Wolfe rang for Fritz. Mr. Panzer, he said, please contact Inspector Kramer. If there's one thing you learn working for Nero Wolfe, it's that the reveal isn't the climax. The confrontation might draw the headlines, but the real chess happens in the aftermath. When the guilty squirm, the innocent stew, and Wolfe moves the pieces that actually matter. After the cumin jar was laid bare, Marvin Krantz half-folded into the red chair like his bones gave up. Lenora Vale looked as if she'd bitten into a lemon dipped in regret. Everett Klain stared forward without blinking. Not because he was calm, but because he knew blinking would mean acknowledging defeat. The others were silent, processing, absorbing, calculating. Saul left to contact Kramer. Wolfe, meanwhile, didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just sat there, the architect of a slow, clean trap that had sprung shut without fanfare. "Mr. Krantz," Wolfe said, "your actions may not have involved a weapon, but the result is no less ruinous. You willingly participated in a campaign of deception to discredit a woman who knew too much. The consequences were reputational, thus, in some circles, worse than legal." "I was leveraged," Marvin mumbled, but Wolfe cut him off with a slight raise of the hand. "Number, you were persuaded. You were tempted. Do not confuse the two." I watched as Claudia's eyes stayed locked on Klain, not Marvin. She already understood the order of power in the room. Krantz may have lit the match, but Klain provided the fuel and the blueprint. Klain, for his part, finally spoke. "If you think I'm going to be dragged into this mess because a washed-up writer and a panicked event planner made poor choices, you already are in it," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "And you're not getting out by talking in italics." Wolfe gestured for silence. "Mr. Klain, I have no interest in your protestations, but I will tell you what interests me greatly. A sealed file from a court proceeding vanished and reappeared. A photo that was staged with cinematic intent. A woman's kitchen reduced to scandal, and then someone enters my house and tampers with my wine cellar. That was the moment this ceased being a case and became a personal affront." "You think I ordered that?" Klain snapped. Wolfe tilted his head. "Of course. You instructed Miss Vale to retrieve the file. She admitted it. That alone would justify contempt. But beyond that, you allowed others to execute your damage control while you kept your hands ostensibly clean." "And yet," Claudia interjected, "you still have no evidence linking Klain directly to Theo Brenton's disappearance." Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to me. "Archie." I pulled a folded paper from my pocket, courtesy of Saul, delivered just an hour before the gathering. "This is a statement from a flight assistant. She saw Theo Brenton at a private terminal 5 days ago, boarding a jet owned by Klain Enterprises. The manifest listed him under a shell identity, Nate Allenson." Klain laughed once, but it sounded forced. "So he fled. That proves nothing." "No," Wolfe said. "It proves everything. Brenton fled after approving the staged photo, after instructing Mr. Krantz to carry it out, and he used your jet, Mr. Klain. The breadcrumbs, as Mr. Goodwin would say, lead from that icebox straight to your balance sheets." Lenora Vale finally stood. Her tone was brittle. "You all let me take the risk. You let me enter this house, steal something, lie, while you stayed quiet." "You weren't innocent," Claudia said sharply. "You chose your role." "Because I thought the file would never resurface," Lenora hissed. "Klain said it was long buried. He said Wolfe was just a collector of useless records." At that, Wolfe chuckled. An actual, quiet chuckle. "Oh, Miss Vale, I collect truths like others collect wine, and I never misplace the labels." The air grew heavier after that. No one moved. Saul returned, nodded once to Wolfe, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Wolfe nodded. He then turned to the room announcing, "Inspector Kramer will arrive within the hour. You may remain here under observation or take your chances elsewhere. But understand, my statement and the collected evidence will be turned over. Some of you will face prosecution, some disgrace, possibly both." Evan Lott, who'd said almost nothing all evening, stood and straightened his jacket. "I'll be leaving." "You'll be seen," Wolfe replied, and remembered. As Lott passed me, I gave him a small wave. "Always a pleasure." After Lott disappeared down the hall, Wolfe turned to Claudia. "You played a clever game. You placed the jar. You leveraged inference, but you withheld direct knowledge until you were sure I would act. Tell me, Was that a strategy or fear? She gave a measured smile. Both. But you responded, didn't you? I did. Because the cruelty offended me. She nodded. Then we're even. Hardly. Wolfe leaned back. You've aligned yourself with those who manufacture stories. Consider whether your integrity is worth the clients you retain. Marvin Krantz was still sunk into his seat. I offered him a glass of water. He didn't take it. Your career is over, Wolfe said softly. But you may still retain your soul, if you choose to reclaim it. The minutes ticked down. One by one, the suspects filtered out, escorted by Saul or me, most silent, some rattled. Claudia lingered at the door. I owe Emily a lot, she said quietly. Maybe more than I realized. Start by telling the truth, I said. To her. Not in a press release. By the time the brownstone emptied, Fritz had already cleared the trays and restored the furniture to its perfect angles. The cumin jar was gone. Wolfe had ordered it stored in a sealed cabinet. As a reminder, he said. Dinner was served late. Cold roast beef, asparagus, and horseradish. Wolfe ate slowly, eyes half-lidded, not saying much. When the meal was done, he placed his fork down and gave a final statement, like he always did. Appetite, Archie, is not merely about hunger. It is about truth. A man's honesty is most clearly seen in what he cannot digest. I leaned back. You mean Krantz? I mean all of them. Every one of those people had a moment they could have chosen decency. They didn't. So I did. I raised my glass. To the man who solves crimes without leaving his chair. He didn't smile, but he didn't object either. Wolfe has a peculiar sense of hospitality. He doesn't believe in welcome mats, never shakes hands, and if you show up uninvited, you're more likely to get expelled than heard. But when he does invite you, especially to the office for what he calls a resolution, you show up, sit down, and keep your mouth shut until summoned. The next morning, after a night of sparse sleep and a breakfast, Fritz served with fewer words than usual. Wolfe had the parlor cleared and the chairs arranged in a semicircle facing his desk. The jar of Costa Rican cumin sat in its usual spot, center stage, a symbol, a prop, and a warning. By 11 a.m., the suspects had returned, all 6. You'd think some would have ducked out after the previous night's fireworks, but Wolfe's reputation and the implication that non-compliance would equal exposure was strong enough to bring them back like moths to the flame. Claudia Keene was first, still in black, carrying nothing but that unshakable confidence of hers. She nodded at me, then at Wolfe, and took her place without a word. Lenora Vale came next, makeup more pronounced today, like she was covering something, guilt, fear, or both. She avoided everyone's gaze and sat stiffly. Evan Lott entered without eye contact. He looked slightly less sure of himself, like he'd been told overnight that Wolfe's threats might actually stick. Nico Hart, the only one who seemed genuinely curious, offered a polite good morning to no one in particular and sat with one leg crossed dramatically over the other. Marvin Krantz looked like someone had drained him of all the liquids a body needs to function. He was pale, hollow-eyed, and clearly hadn't slept. Everett Klain brought up the rear. Perfect suit, clean shave, cool expression, the kind of look rich men wear when they know they're guilty but believe money is an alibi. Wolfe let them settle. The room went silent. Then, in that slow, deliberate tone that signaled the closing act, Wolfe spoke. You are all here because I am finished. A pause. No one dared misinterpret it. Finished gathering, finished observing, and finished tolerating your performances. Nico smiled faintly, but Wolfe didn't glance his way. This room has hosted confessions before. Some voluntary, most not. But today, I do not ask for confessions. I'm here to issue facts. He gestured toward the cumin jar. This item, planted in my home, belongs to a chain of misdeeds originating with Mr. Brenton and ending with Mr. Clane. It was used to stage a scandal, one that ruined Emily Barish and protected those running illegal shell operations under the guise of catered events. Clane smirked. You've said that already. Yes, Wolfe replied calmly. But what I haven't said, until now, is what I intend to do about it. He turned to me. Archie. I stepped forward and handed each guest a single-page document. Wolfe waited until they'd all glanced at it. It was a summary, not a transcript, not a theory, a summary, compiled from statements, receipts, file metadata, and a timeline that linked every guest, every action, and every lie. Wolfe had turned the last 72 hours into a flowchart of guilt. Mr. Krantz, Wolfe said, you executed the photograph. That is irrefutable. Your fingerprints are on the jar, and the metadata from the image shows your laptop as the editing source. Marvin didn't argue. He just slumped lower in his chair. Miss Vale, Wolfe continued, you stole a sealed file from my wine cellar and returned it after inspecting its contents. Your fingerprints are on the envelope's wax seal. I do not know if Mr. Clane instructed you explicitly. I suspect he only hinted. That is his style. Lenora looked down. Mr. Clane, Wolfe said, you chartered the flight used by Theo Brenton. We have statements, flight logs, and confirmation from a ground crewman. You knew Brenton's plan to flee and helped him vanish. Whether he is in hiding or dead is now irrelevant. The law will not make such a distinction in your case. Clane said nothing. His jaw twitched once. Wolfe shifted his attention. Mr. Lott, you obstructed. You advised Brenton to distance from volatile assets. That included the file Emily discovered. Your emails, poorly deleted, contain the phrase, let the fallout land on the caterer. Unsubtle, but effective. Evan Lott closed his eyes. Mr. Hart, Wolfe said, you were a participant only in silence. You knew the photo was a fabrication, but withheld that truth. That is your sin, not action, but cowardice. Nico actually nodded. I suppose I'll accept that. Finally, Wolfe turned to Claudia. You acted independently. You smuggled the jar into my kitchen, not as sabotage, but as provocation. Your motive was partial redemption, perhaps even guilt, but your manipulation forced this confrontation. For that, I cannot thank you, but I will acknowledge the result. Claudia inclined her head. The room was heavy with the sound of reputation collapsing. Wolfe gestured toward the door. Mr. Panzer has provided the district attorney with copies of the documents you hold. Legal action will proceed. I'm finished with you. Clane stood. You can't end us with a monologue. I didn't, Wolfe replied. You ended yourselves with your choices. One by one they left. Claudia was last. She lingered at the door and said, You could have turned this into a public circus. Wolfe looked at her. Justice should be quiet, but final. When the office was finally empty, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. You know what bothers me most, Archie? He said after a long silence. What's that? Not the deceit. That is expected, but the ease with which they justified cruelty. I nodded. You think Brenton's still out? There. Yes, but he'll be irrelevant soon. Why? Because the lie he built couldn't survive the truth Emily saw in a freezer. And the cumin. A detail, Wolfe murmured, but one that burned through everything they tried to hide. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe in full reveal mode, let me paint the picture. He doesn't pace, he doesn't point, he doesn't raise his voice or drop dramatic pauses. What he does is speak with such deliberate finality that the air in the room starts to feel heavier than the furniture. And when the case has built to its peak, when the suspects have been prodded, the clues placed, and every lie drained of oxygen, he begins the slow, methodical unwinding that makes everything else look like noise. That afternoon, After the last of our guests had trickled out and the echo of Lenora Vale's perfume finally faded from the hallway, Wolfe remained at his desk, motionless. I thought maybe we were done, that the moral lecture was the finale. But Wolfe didn't move because he wasn't done. He was waiting for something or someone to blink first. That someone turned out to be Claudia Keene. At 5:42 p.m., she rang the bell again. Fritz answered, took one look at her face, and let her in without ceremony. I met her in the front room. She didn't ask to see Wolfe. She didn't need to. I walked her to the office, and Wolfe, as if anticipating it, looked up from his beer without surprise. "I didn't come to defend myself," she said, taking a seat without being offered one. "I came to tell you what Emily wouldn't." Wolfe said nothing. Claudia opened a small, flat envelope and handed it across the desk. Inside was a photograph. Black and white. A man, Theo Brenton, standing beside a small, unmarked cargo plane. He was smiling. The timestamp showed the photo was taken 2 weeks before the dinner. Wolfe studied it. "I took that photo myself," Claudia said. "I followed Theo out of curiosity. At the time, I thought maybe he was seeing someone. But what I found was this airstrip. I didn't know what it meant until Emily mentioned the ledger." "You withheld this," Wolfe said. "Yes, because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I thought it was something scandalous, not criminal. Not this." Wolfe handed the photo to me. The cargo plane had a faint insignia near the rear, barely visible, but enough that it looked familiar. I took it over to the files in the corner, pulled out a document from an older case. There it was. Haddington Logistics, a company Wolfe had once suspected of helping offload luxury goods under false invoices. One of their names had shown up in Brenton's catering ledger. I turned to Wolfe. "That's the connection. The shell vendors Emily saw, one of them was Haddington." Wolfe nodded slowly. "So Brenton wasn't just siphoning money. He was shipping something." Claudia looked up. "Drugs?" "No," Wolfe said. "Too risky, and too volatile for someone like Brenton. No, likely digital hardware, maybe sensitive components, funneled in through legitimate purchases. Sold under bogus company accounts. The events were fronts, the meals were cover." Claudia closed her eyes. "God, and I helped organize those events." "You didn't know," I said. She looked at me. "That's no defense. I should have asked more questions." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Keene, you made a choice. To bring the spice jar into this house. That was not a lie. That was a signal. It forced action. You did not sabotage Emily, but you did withhold key details that could have spared her." "I know," she whispered. Wolfe tapped the photo once. "This will be added to the report. It will likely lead to further investigation. Brenton's name will no longer be buried under retreat and convenience. That is justice, however belated." Claudia stood. "I'll tell Emily everything. No lawyers. No spin." Wolfe waved a hand. "Do so, and leave us." She left quietly. I closed the door behind her and returned to the desk. Wolfe was looking at the now empty space where the spice jar had sat for the past week. It had been boxed and sealed that morning, marked for evidence. "So that's it?" I asked. "No," Wolfe replied. "Not quite." He turned in his chair toward the bookshelf, removed a slim black binder and opened it. Inside was a copy of the catering ledger. Wolfe tapped the final page. "This," he said, "is the lie that held the entire scheme together. The total amounts, the vendor names, the falsified balances, all carefully arranged to seem plausible." I leaned in. So, observe line item 47. I read it aloud. "Crown Fork Consulting, invoice for special inventory coordination, $18,200. "And?" I asked. "That invoice," Wolfe said, "was charged one day before the dinner. But Crown Fork was dissolved 4 weeks earlier. Legally. No new filings. The company did not exist. I blinked. So Brenton invoiced a phantom. Wolfe gave a short nod. A final extraction, a last pull. He knew the walls were closing in. That single entry proved his guilt. And Emily saw it. Yes, she saw it, and she remembered it. That's why she was targeted, and that's why the icebox wasn't just a hiding place. It was a vault. That folder held the only copy of the post-dissolution invoice. And once she saw it, Brenton had no choice but to silence her. Socially, reputationally, professionally. I sat down across from him. So, where is he now? Wolfe closed the binder and placed it precisely where it belonged. Irrelevant. The machine he built is exposed. His silence is no longer power. The others will turn on him once prosecution looms. I rubbed my jaw. Still feels unfinished. It is, Wolfe said, but it is also unburied. That is enough. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Catering firm. Implicated in corporate laundering scheme. Private events used to conceal offshore deals. And my favorite, spice jar at center of white-collar crime probe. Wolfe refused to read them. Said the press reduced everything to spectacle, but I saw him scan the bottom corner of the Gazette, where a quiet editorial praised Emily Barish for her accidental integrity. She didn't give interviews, didn't hold a press conference, just reopened her kitchen 2 days later and sent Wolfe a handwritten note. All it said was, "Thank you. Dinner is on me. Anytime you wish. No secrets, no surprises." Wolfe read it once, folded it, and placed it in his drawer. After dinner that night, veal artichoke hearts and a sauce Fritz refused to name, Wolfe leaned back and let out a soft grunt of satisfaction. "You know, Archie," he said, "it is remarkable what a lie can endure. But even more remarkable is what truth survives." The brownstone returned to silence, the kind Wolfe liked best, dense, unbroken, and obedient. No clients ringing the bell, no inspectors barking for statements, no spice jars appearing where they didn't belong. Just the predictable rhythm of meals from Fritz, books being pulled from shelves with the soft whisper of leather bindings, and the occasional sound of Wolfe turning pages with the same care most people reserve for porcelain. But even in that stillness, the case lingered. Wolfe might have been back in his chair, buried in the 3rd volume of Pliny, but I could tell his mind wasn't entirely in ancient Rome. Something about how he paused longer than usual at the end of a paragraph, or how he let his beer go a little warmer than acceptable. These were micro-clues, but to a man like Wolfe, they were practically confessions. It made sense. This hadn't been one of our usual crimes. No body, no blood, no murder weapon stuffed in a coat closet. What we'd dealt with was slipperier. Greed dressed in suits, sabotage disguised as incompetence, and reputations murdered without so much as lifting a hand. Still, what surprised me most was Wolfe's final move. He hadn't demanded credit. He hadn't even spoken to the press. When Inspector Kramer had come by for a short debrief, Wolfe had spoken for all of 5 minutes and waved off the rest. He gave him the full files, copies of Claudia's photo, Emily's testimony, the evidence logs, and offered nothing beyond that. For Wolfe, that was his version of applause. I found myself thinking more about Emily Barish than the ones we'd exposed. Maybe because she was the only one who'd never asked for any of this. She'd walked into a kitchen to make a meal and found herself staring at the financial guts of a fraud empire. And when someone tried to smear her, she'd done the hardest thing a person can do under fire. She kept her mouth shut and her dignity intact. A week after the last of our suspects had vanished into legal limbo, Wolfe finally mentioned her again, out of nowhere. "Archie," he said over lunch, "it is curious what survives scandal." I was slicing through my lemon chicken. "Curious like what?" "Grace," he said. "Composure, the strength not to retaliate." Most people don't confuse that with strength. Most people are fools. I chewed, swallowed. You regret not talking to her yourself. She would not have needed me, he said. She found truth on her own. I merely confirmed it. That was the most praise Wolfe ever gave anyone outside this house. A few days later, I decided to visit her. Not as a detective, not as Wolfe's legman, just as the guy who'd watched the whole thing unfold and felt like maybe, just maybe, someone deserved to hear how it ended. Emily's kitchen was open again. Smaller crowd, more careful planning. She didn't recognize me at first. Understandable. I'd only ever seen her in the thick of a reputational hurricane. When she did, she wiped her hands on her apron and offered me a tired smile. Didn't expect to see you. I owed you a report, I said. Everything's moving. Clayne's being investigated for fraud. Marvin's already singing to save himself. Lot's been disbarred. And Theo? Still missing, but nobody's betting on his return tour. She nodded slowly. And Claudia? Out of the spotlight. But she did what she said. Told the truth. You've got a lot of defenders now, whether you want them or not. Emily leaned against the prep counter. It still doesn't fix what I lost. But it stops the bleeding. She looked around the room, bright, clean, smelling faintly of roasted thyme and citrus. I guess I rebuild. You already did. After a beat, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Why did he take the case? I grinned. Because someone left a spice jar in his house. That's it? It insulted his kitchen. She laughed, a full, genuine laugh. And it was probably the most satisfying sound I'd heard since this whole mess began. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room with his orchids, whispering to them in Latin, as if they'd done something noble and just needed affirmation. I didn't interrupt. I went straight to the office and sat in my chair, flipping through a magazine I didn't read. After dinner that night, over poached salmon and a very quiet Riesling, Wolfe finally spoke again about the case. Not the people, not the evidence. The case. You realize, he said, that none of them believed they were wrong. Sure they did, I said. They just didn't think they'd get caught. That is not the same. They believed their choices were pragmatic, defensive, justified. Only one acted with the full weight of conscience. Emily, he nodded. I tapped my fork. And Claudia. She navigated the edge of guilt and ambition. She landed on the correct side, but she began on the wrong. I raised an eyebrow. That almost sounded forgiving. It is not forgiveness, Wolfe said, taking a sip of beer. It is classification. I let that sit. He added, the world is not divided between villains and victims. It is divided between those who accept truth and those who manufacture alternatives. I shook my head. And here I thought it was just about a dinner party. Wolfe didn't smile, but he let out a slow breath, which for him was the equivalent. After we cleared the plates, Fritz returned to the kitchen, and I returned to my desk, jotting down a few notes, wondering if there'd be any court trials worth testifying in, or if Clayne would buy his way into obscurity. Wolfe glanced at me once more. Archie. Yeah? Do not allow the next case to involve my kitchen. I held up both hands. I'll keep the spice cabinet sacred. I swear he leaned back, closed his eyes, and added, the next trespasser won't be given the courtesy of a lecture. That was the end of it. The office returned to its normal hum, the brownstone held its breath in peace, and Wolfe, Nero Wolfe, was once again the undisputed master of the only courtroom that mattered. His own chair. You'd think once a case wraps up and the bad guys are being frog-marched into their respective career graves, things would feel lighter, cleaner, tied up like a Christmas package with a big bow, and Wolfe nodding solemnly over trout amandine. But that's not how it works in the brownstone. Wolfe may tie his cases shut with logic, but what lingers afterward doesn't always obey reason. Sometimes it just stays there in the air, like the scent of something burned, long after the oven's off. 2 weeks had passed since the final domino fell. The city buzzed with the latest scandal. A hedge fund imploding, a celebrity chef arrested for tax fraud. But in our little fortress on West 35th Street, the silence told me Wolfe wasn't quite done thinking about this one. It showed in the subtle things. He reread the case files not once but 3 times. He didn't accept any new clients, despite 3 decent offers, one of them involving real estate fraud, which usually got his attention. He skipped his usual Wednesday afternoon beer, twice. That alone would have been enough to worry me. So I finally asked him, "You planning to take up knitting, or are you still mentally rearranging the suspects into a different moral grid?" He didn't look up from his book. "Neither. I'm reflecting." "On what?" He turned the page. "On consequences." "Whose?" He didn't answer right away, so I filled the silence for him. "Emily Barish is back in business. Claudia Keene gave her a public apology. Marvin Krantz is writing anonymous op-eds for a blog that gets 6 views a week. Klane's empire is in freefall, and Evan Lott's name is being scrubbed from every law firm that ever let him carry a briefcase. Seems like justice got served, piping hot." Wolfe looked at me finally. "You confuse endings with closure." I sat back. "So what's left open?" He tapped the side of his beer glass. "Truth does not erase damage, Archie. It only reveals the shape of it." That was Wolfe's way of saying Emily would never get back the opportunities that evaporated when her name turned into a headline. That no apology from Claudia or quiet cooperation from Marvin would undo the fact that people who never met her decided she was disposable. That once your name is tangled in scandal, true or not, it doesn't come back clean. It comes back dented. A day later, we received a small box in the mail. No return address, just a neatly handwritten tag. "To the man who protected my kitchen better than I did." Inside was a pristine copper spice rack, hand-forged, labeled, empty. Fritz brought it in like it was some kind of artifact. Wolfe read the card, examined the craftsmanship, and nodded once. "Miss Barish has taste." "It's meant for use," Fritz said, mildly alarmed. "Not display." "It is a symbol," Wolfe replied. "We do not stir symbols into soup." So the spice rack was installed in the corner of the pantry where the old cumin jar had sat. Not to hold anything, just to mark the spot. That evening, after a dinner, Fritz outdid himself on braised rabbit with rosemary, wild rice, and some rare Austrian white that Wolfe had apparently been saving since 1998. Wolfe pushed back from the table and said something I didn't expect. "I dislike that I never confronted Brenton directly." "You confronted his scheme," I said. "Schemes are reflections," he replied. "They lack pulse. He was the one who constructed it, pivoted, and abandoned his accomplices. I would have liked to ask him one question." "Which was?" Wolfe paused. "Whether he believed what he built was clever or merely necessary." "That's it." Wolfe nodded. "Motivation fascinates me more than method. Many fools can hide money, but not all believe themselves artists when they do." I mulled that over as I cleared my plate. Later that week, Saul Panzer paid a visit. Not for work. Just coffee and a quiet check-in, which was his version of downtime. We sat in the front room while Fritz rattled around in the kitchen, and Wolfe, from behind his desk, asked Saul what we didn't know. Saul sipped his coffee first. Brenton was spotted in Mallorca. Private villa, expat district. Passport under the name Reynard Owens. He's not hiding hard. He's just waiting to be forgotten. "Will they go after him?" I asked. Saul shrugged. Klane flipped. Gave the DOJ everything. If Brenton sets foot in a country with extradition, he's cooked. Wolfe gave a slow nod. And yet, he will not be extradited. Unlikely, Saul agreed. He'll live long, eat well, and think none of it ever really touched him. I looked at Wolfe. That gonna keep you up at night? No, he said flatly. But it will keep someone else up, eventually. Men like Brenton accumulate enemies faster than receipts, and they are never as clever as they think. Saul stood to go. Before he left, he handed me a manila envelope. Extra copies of the court filings. For your files. I filed them, but not before flipping through one last time. Reading Emily's original testimony, the quiet lines, the blunt honesty, the part where she described opening a freezer and realizing she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to, gave me a strange feeling. Not closure, not satisfaction. Just a reminder that real courage is often quiet, invisible, and offered without an audience. That weekend, I stopped by her kitchen again. She had a small crowd, some new staff, and a menu scribbled on a chalkboard in front. She saw me, waved me in, and asked me to taste the lamb. I told her it was perfect. She smiled. On the way out, I noticed a new dish towel by the prep station, embroidered with 3 small words. Tell the truth. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already halfway through a novel. He didn't ask me where I'd been. He didn't need to. As I poured his beer and set it down, he looked up once. Was the food worthy of the redemption? I smiled. It was better than justice. He didn't smile back, but his eyes flicked once to the pantry. Then he said, "Good." And with that, the case of the icebox that held a lie was closed, not by punishment, not even by exposure, but by a single kitchen reopening its doors. By the time we hit the 3rd week after the spice jar incident, the brownstone had fully reclaimed its rhythm. Fritz was back to experimenting with beurre blanc variations. The orchids were basking in their afternoon mist sessions. The stack of client requests in Wolfe's inbox had begun to swell again. Politicians with bad optics, businessmen with vanishing funds, and one earnest young man who suspected his aunt was poisoning the family parrot. Wolfe, naturally, ignored them all. "Let the world misbehave a little longer," he said on a Tuesday when I nudged the stack toward his elbow. "I'm not yet ready to reacquaint myself with its stupidity." Which, coming from Wolfe, meant the case had left more of a mark than usual. You'd think a man who wins as often and thoroughly as Wolfe would learn to feel victorious, but he doesn't. He doesn't gloat, and he doesn't strut. Victory to him is like digestion, unnecessary, quiet, and best left unspoken unless it goes badly. What bothered him now wasn't the scheme or the liars. It was the quiet epilogue. The way Brenton disappeared into sunlight, the way the damage settled on the shoulders of those least equipped to carry it. I offered him a solution over lunch. "Take a vacation," I said. "Let's go to Montauk. You can insult the Atlantic and tell the fishmonger his scales are insufficiently symmetrical." "No," he said, wiping his mouth. "That would require exposure to sand. Then maybe dinner out. Somewhere with fewer memories than this dining room." He narrowed his eyes. "I require precise temperature control." I threw my napkin down. "You mean to tell me that solving a corporate fraud ring and restoring a woman's reputation didn't earn us even one decent meal outside? You may eat wherever you like, Archie," he said with a flick of his hand. "I intend to remain here, where the salt is honest." That night, something surprising happened. Fritz handed me a small note. Folded, handwritten. The return address was local. I opened it and found a simple message inside. "Bring him to dinner. One guest only, no media, no ceremony, just food." It was signed, Emily Barish. I showed it to Wolfe. He read it once, twice, then again. Then he did something rarer than spotting a Yeti on a tricycle. He agreed. We left the brownstone at 6:42 p.m. that Thursday, after Wolfe ensured Fritz knew how to hold down the fortress in our absence. I drove us through traffic while he muttered about cabbies, humidity, and the questionable ethics of neon signage. But when we pulled up outside Emily's kitchen, low lights, clean windows, the scent of roasted herbs wafting into the street, he fell silent. She greeted us herself, no apron this time. Just a white blouse and the kind of calm that only returns once the storm has passed and you've swept up the glass. "Welcome," she said, not to me, but to Wolfe. He inclined his head. "You did not have to." "I wanted to," she said. "The world took enough from me. I'd like to offer something back." She led us to a table in the corner. No one else was there. Just 3 courses, already arranged. A salad of grilled peach and arugula, braised short ribs with parsnip mash, and a dessert that Fritz would have written poetry for, black cherry tart with cardamom whipped cream. Wolfe didn't speak during the meal, but he ate every bite. Slowly, deliberately, without critique. When he finished, he set his utensils down with a softness I'd never seen before. "Miss Barish," he said. This was immaculate. She smiled. "You brought truth into my kitchen. I thought I'd return the favor." Afterward, she brought out a final item. Not food, a folder. "I found this last week," she said, setting it gently on the table. "It was hidden behind a drawer in the prep station. I thought everything had been unearthed, but this must have been Theo's last ledger. It's written in code, but I figured if anyone could break it, it'd be you." Wolfe took the folder like it was glass. "Why didn't you call the authorities?" I asked. "Because I'm done letting other people tell my story," she said. "Let Wolfe decide what it means." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe spent the next 3 days decoding the entries. I watched as he combed through symbols, margins, shorthand notes that would have slipped past any IRS auditor alive. When he was done, he called me into the office and handed me his typed summary. Brenton used the events to funnel equipment, GPS jammers, encrypted drives, untraceable tech, into private storage units across New York and Miami. It was never about money. It was about leverage. Leverage for what? Politics, blackmail, insurance. His empire wasn't built to grow. It was built to last after he vanished. And now it is exposed. The authorities will know where to dig. I nodded slowly. So Emily's kitchen wasn't the weak point. It was the only strong one in the whole system. "Yes," Wolfe said. And she held. A week later, the press got the story. Quietly. No photos. Just a page 9 article about fraudulent logistics networks collapsing under an anonymous tip. No names. No spice jars. No sensationalism. But Wolfe read it. I know because I saw him tear the article out and fold it into the back of his Orchid journal, behind a pressed clipping from years ago titled "The Case of the Silent Watchmaker." That evening, over duck à l'orange, Wolfe made his final remark on the case. "Archie," he said, "I do not pursue justice out of virtue. I do it because I cannot stand rot." I raised my glass. "Then I hope, for all our sakes, the pantry stays clean." He gave me a look, a rare one, a small twitch of the mouth that almost, just almost, resembled peace. "May it be so," he said. And for once, I didn't feel the need to say anything smart, because for all the noise and fraud and cowardice we'd seen, there was something undeniable left behind. A kitchen reopened, a lie exhumed, and in the heart of the brownstone, silence worth keeping.